No career in sports is a certainty, especially in baseball. One clear example of this is with the amateur drafts in the major sports leagues. In the NBA draft, a player picked in the lottery, which is a pick made within the first 14 selections, is more likely to be successful. But as we've seen time and time again, some are not able to adapt to the higher level of competition. The league where this is seen the most is in the MLB. In the MLB, a player picked in the first round of the draft is not likely to see any action in the big leagues for at least 2 to 4 seasons, depending on how they perform in the minor leagues. But some first rounders don't even make the big leagues. And even if they do, only a select few will see long-standing success. So this is me trying to say how a long-standing career in a major sport is not a certainty. However, those are just the players that have yet to make a name for themselves. What about the ones who have made a name for themselves? How long can they maintain their peak level of success? Everyone is bound to regress at some point in their careers, but teams expect a gradual decline. Well, not everyone is built for sustained longevity, and that seems to be the case for Cubs reliever Craig Kimbrel. Once heralded as one of the best, if not the best closer in the MLB, Kimbrel has shown a steep regression over the past couple of seasons, most recently with his first 2 outings of 2020 against the Reds and Pirates. What prompted this sudden decline? That's what we'll be answering today. But first, in order to accurately illustrate Kimbrel's sudden downfall, we need to go back to his early days in Atlanta, so we can get a sense of how good he really was. Kimbrel had a brief stint in the big leagues in 2010, but he became the team's closer in 2011. Between the years of 2011 and 2014, among relievers, Kimbrel ranked 2nd in Ks per 9, 1st in FIP, 1st in expected FIP, 1st in ERA, 1st in WAR, and 1st in saves by a huge margin. At the time, he was placed in the conversation as one of the best closers of all time, or at least he was on the road to being placed in that conversation. What made him so successful? Well, the velocity of his fastball reached speeds just shy of 100 miles per hour, and this was during a point when the rate of velocity for power pitchers was rising. But these type of pitchers were not as common as they are today. But what separated Kimbrel is that he had great command of his fastball and his curveball. When you throw a 4-seam fastball, you need pinpoint accuracy to make up for the lack of movement, and Kimbrel did just that. Because of this command with his fastball, he was able to fool hitters with his curveball. However, there were some negatives. During his tenure with the Braves, his walks per 9 and opponent BABIP were not great, something that would foreshadow his future. Still, his run with the Braves made him arguably the most coveted reliever in the league. Now, let me introduce you to the rockstar GM himself, AJ Preller. Preller became the Padres general manager in mid-2014. In his first offseason, he decided that San Diego needed some stars. So, in the same way that I rebuild a team in out-of-the-park baseball, Preller decided to trade and sign for some established names to build some fan interest. And right before opening day, the team traded for Craig Kimbrel. In his lone season with the team, he took a noticeable step back in production, but at the very least, he was still considered an above-average closer. In fact, he reached the 200 save milestone at 318 games played. This was the fastest that a reliever had reached that milestone. At the surface, there is no glaring reason as to why he struggled with the Padres. His average velocity for both his fastball and curveball was at the highest of his entire career, and he moved to a pitcher's friendly park in San Diego. So why did he regress? Well, something I found was his outside swing percentage. This is the percentage of pitches a batter swings outside the strike zone. Excluding Kimbrel's 2-month tenure in 2010, his outside swing percentage in 2015 was the worst of his entire career, meaning he was not getting batters to chase his pitches. In correlation with this stat, his put-away percentage with his curveball was down, compared to his days in Atlanta. When you couple these numbers with the fact that he was primarily throwing his breaking ball down and away more than ever, you can see a cause for concern. He was throwing his strikeout pitch as a ball at a higher rate, so he could get batters to chase. The problem was that they were not chasing as much as before. Considering that with the Braves, Kimbrel primarily threw his curveball low in the strike zone as opposed to down and away. I don't know why he chose to throw his curveball out of the strike zone. You could blame his new pitching coach Darren Balsley, but to point out Balsley's recent success with relievers, Balsley turned an aging Fernando Rodney into a valuable piece, which netted the Padres Chris Paddock. Just look at Rodney's ERA plus in his 28-game stint with the Padres. Just look at it. Admire it. Anyway, Balsley also turned Brad Hand into a valuable piece, netting the Padres' top prospect, Francisco Mejia, and he has done the same with Kirby Yates. So it may be unfair to blame Kimbrel's pitching coach, though of course it could still be warranted. This new tendency with his curveball resulted in Kimbrel having to throw his fastball for strikes more often, which already does not have much movement. This resulted in more home runs, a higher hit rate, and less strikeouts. Up to this point in his career, this was Kimbrel at his worst, which was still better than most average relievers. But this season foreshadowed a worrying trend for the near future. In the offseason, Kimbrel was traded to the Red Sox, and it was actually more of the same in 2016. He continued his trend of throwing breaking balls away, although his outside swing percentage and put-away percentage on his curveball had risen. The problem this season was his lack of control, as seen with his walks per 9 rate, although his FIP makes this season look a little better considering his ERA. 2017 was a return to form for Kimbrel. Like his previous seasons in Atlanta, he started to throw his breaking ball low in the strike zone as opposed to low and away. As a result, his strikeouts per 9 rate was at the top of the league among relievers. Also, his FIP was ranked number 2, his expected FIP at number 1, ERA at number 2, and WAR at number 2. Basically, he pitched his best season since his prime days in Atlanta. Kimbrel's 2018 season can be pointed as the start of his decline. He started the season off well, but his second half was just bad. In the 2018 postseason, Kimbrel was not the lights-out reliever he was supposed to be, but he still won a World Series ring. However, his velocity was going down, which made him rely on his breaking ball more than ever. But he kept throwing them low and away, and as a result, his put-away percentage had gone down considerably compared to the previous season, although his whiff percentage with the curveball was about the same, which could mean if he located the curveball like he did in Atlanta, he could have gotten more strikeouts. It's important to point out the league's pitching environment in 2018. Kimbrel had lost some velocity and power pitchers were becoming more prevalent. How big of a problem was this for Kimbrel? Well, after the 2018 season, he was a free agent, and he wanted to get paid, like record-breaking money. He wanted a 6-year deal worth $100 million. The biggest deals ever given to a reliever up to that point were given to Aroldis Chapman and Kenley Jansen. While this was a huge ask, a team could have been desperate enough to at least equal the record-breaking deals. The problem was that the Red Sox offered Kimbrel a qualifying offer, and he declined it, meaning that if someone signed Kimbrel before the MLB draft, that team owed the Red Sox a 4th-round pick. Normally, it would be a higher pick, but because the Red Sox exceeded the competitive balance tax threshold in 2018, they had to settle for a 4th-round selection. Well, actually, they had to settle for nothing, as teams already saw Kimbrel as a gamble, so they signed the other free agents on the market. And on June 7th, 2019, after the completion of the draft, Kimbrel signed a 3-year deal with the Cubs worth $43 million. How did he perform with his new team? Well, 2019 was similar to 2016 in the sense that some hitters were starting to swing at his breaking pitches, but because of the regressing velocity, more hitters than ever were swinging at the pitches in the strike zone, which illustrates Kimbrel's lack of movement and loss of velocity with his fastball. As a result, Kimbrel's numbers took a nosedive, essentially becoming a liability overnight. And as of recording this audio, Kimbrel has made 2 appearances in 2020, both not so great. I don't want to get into the more specific metrics because of the small sample size in 2020, but the basic numbers speak for themselves. Still, Kimbrel's decline was inevitable, but I don't think anyone believed it would be this sudden. What other factors were there? Well, like I mentioned earlier, fastball velocity has risen over the past decade, as more pitches are being thrown over 95 miles per hour than ever before. Kimbrel was successful with the Braves because it was towards the beginning of this new wave of power pitchers. In the late 2010s, hitters started to adapt to these faster pitches. Today, Kimbrel's fastball is above average in velocity compared to the rest of the league, but it's not uncommon. Also, his put-away percentage with his fastball is lower than ever, and his zone swing and zone contact percentage, which are metrics that show the frequency in which batters swing and make contact with pitches in the strike zone, are higher than ever. Why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Looking at the heat maps, the command of Kimbrel's fastball has gotten more erratic compared to his previous seasons, like his curveball. In earlier seasons, fastballs were mainly placed in the strike zone. Over time, they started to rise above the strike zone, and in 2019, they were all over the place. That's quite the difference. As a result, if the batter recognizes that a strike is coming, he'll be more likely to swing, especially considering Kimbrel's velocity is down and the velocity he's throwing is more commonplace in today's baseball environment. Another reason is the movement of his pitches. StatCast data that begins in 2015 shows that the range of movement on both of Kimbrel's pitches has shrunk over the years. In 2019, the movement range was at its lowest. Also, something that isn't purely stat related is Kimbrel's delivery. This tweet shows that Kimbrel's delivery is much different compared to Boston. His delivery lacks deception, and it looks like his elbow placement is also different. It's possible he is trying to avoid injury by using his elbow this way, but it's just not working for him. So here's the condensed list of what I think caused Kimbrel to decline so dramatically. Early in his career, he relied on his velocity and command to make up for the lack of movement in his fastball. It worked because of the great command of his curveball, and the power pitching landscape was not comparable to today. In 2015, he threw his curveball in a location where hitters were not swinging at, causing his fastball to be hit more often. His first 2 seasons in Boston were good as he went back to what worked for him. However, he dropped off in 2018 because of loss in velocity, the pre-existing lack of movement in his fastball, and the inability to properly locate his curveball, which led to more walks and home runs. Today, he tries to compensate for his lack of command, lack of movement, and loss of velocity in his fastball by increasing the rate of his curveball. However, like his final days in Boston, he tends to throw this pitch low and away, and hitters are not swinging, causing his walk rate to rise and his zone contact rate to rise as well. So, what's the solution? Well, Kimbrel's manager David Ross believes the issues are mechanical, particularly with the lack of deception in his delivery, which I do agree with, although I agree with GM Jed Hoyer's statement a lot more. As he mentions, the distinct qualities of Kimbrel's pitches are simply not there. However, I believe it's much more than just mechanical issues. It's more likely a combination of faulty mechanics, loss of velocity, loss of command, lack of movement in his fastball, and the ever-changing landscape of pitching. Is it possible that faulty mechanics have caused the accelerated loss of velocity and command? Sure it can. However, Kimbrel's pitches today are not as abnormal as they were less than a decade ago. Look at guys like Brusdar Graterol and Jordan Hicks. Their pitches have more velocity and movement compared to prime Kimbrel. If Kimbrel wants to be successful and have a shot of making the Hall of Fame, he needs to reinvent himself. I think he needs to add movement to his fastball, maybe a 2-seam fastball or a sinker, and this should allow him to be more comfortable throwing his curveball in the lower half of the strike zone rather than low and away. All I'm saying is that if Kimbrel does reinvent himself by adding movement to his fastball, I'm taking all the credit. And then I will know that David Ross watches my videos. If you're watching this, David Ross, you're welcome. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you did. Subscribe if you want to stick around. Thanks for watching.